Hello, and welcome to FACT's webinar, Treating Farming as a Business, Not a Hobby. Our guest presenter is Gray Shipley with Shipley Farm Beef. I'm Samantha Gasson, FACT's Humane Farming Program Director, and I will be moderating this session. Thank you for joining us. Before we dive right in, let me take a minute or two. Do you mind advancing the screen, Catherine? To do a few quick introductions, Food Animal Concerns Trust, or FACT, is a national nonprofit organization that works to ensure that all food-producing animals are raised in a humane and healthy manner. We accomplish this by supporting humane farmers through our humane farming program, promoting policies that make foods from animals safe and healthy to eat through our Safe and Healthy Foods program, and generally help consumers make informed food choices. Please visit our website at foodanimalconcernstrust.org to learn more about our farmer services. And as always, I would really like to thank my colleague, Catherine Hope, for helping me out today. At this time, I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed presenter, Gray Shipley. Gray came to farming honestly. It was just a more roundabout way than the average fifth-generation farmer. As is typical with many small multi-generation Appalachian farms, the kids grow up, get an education, and never return to their roots. Like his dad before him, that's how Gray started. After undergrad at Alabama, a stint in the real world, an MBA from Dartmouth, and a career as a serial entrepreneur, Gray found himself partnering with his dad, Bob Shipley Jr., and his 101-year-old grandfather, Bob Shipley Sr., which is crazy, good for him, to revitalize their centenarian ancestral cattle farm. Gray's experience as an entrepreneur, coupled with his experience as a farmer, lends a unique perspective on local economics and supply chains, as well as the challenges farmers face on a daily basis. So we are incredibly lucky to have Gray with us today for our final webinar of the season. We won't be having any more of these until September, which we're already planning for it, so it's really exciting. Without further ado, I will turn the floor over to Gray so that he may begin his presentation. Gray, it's all yours. Take it away.
Samantha, thank you. I'm going to see if I can correctly hit the right buttons here and make the thing do what it's supposed to do. Are we seeing the screen there?
Looks good.
That's great. So I want to tell you a little bit of the rest of that story. I'm on what I still think of as Granddad's farm. And here's a picture of me and my dad and Granddad taken several years ago. So Dad grew up in a little brick house that you can see back there behind the barn. And this is the family homestead, and we're a pretty typical farm family. And kind of like the story that Samantha alluded to, it's Granddad's farm, and Dad was the generation that moved off and went to college and grew up in Raleigh. And so I was the generation after that was born in Raleigh, in the city, and was off in a business career. And so Granddad was the generation that was left here, continuing to run the farm while he taught vocational agriculture. So especially in Western North Carolina, a lot of farmers are bivocational. And so he taught vocational ag, and then he farmed on the side until mandatory retirement from the school system when he was about 70. And then he kept farming until he was about 90 and retired from farming at around 90 years old. When he turned 101, he decided he was bored with retirement, so he wanted to write a book and get back in the cattle business. And that was the turning point for me and for us and for our family that kind of changed that trajectory that most farm families follow, of the generation that stays, and then the generation that leaves, and then the next generation that ends up with the farm being sold and developed, and we lose another family farm. But when Granddad decided that he needed something else to do and wanted to launch back into the cattle business at 101, I got interested, and Dad and I got back involved. And so we broke from that typical path, and Dad and I came back to the farm and started wrestling with the competing realities that we find across farming today, which is that it is a good thing. And things that happen in family farms across America are wonderful things, and it feeds our community, but it's also very hard. And so we started to wrestle with and encounter the question of how do we bring business principles into farming in a way to overcome what are very real and very significant obstacles that a lot of us are facing. I'm going to go out on a limb and imagine that a lot of you here today are struggling. And the reason that I imagine that is because I know the statistics. Small scale commodity farming, especially if you're a small family farm, multi-generational farm, it's very low margin, The data here in North Carolina is that 81% of our farmers claim less than $25,000 in income. 39% have farming as their primary income. Even and just there, those numbers don't add up, right? And this is true in North Carolina, and I think it's pretty universally true across the country as you look at the surveys from agricultural census that say 58 to 60% of farmers in most states report losing money on farming. That's the harsh reality. I imagine a bunch of you are experiencing these same realities as well. North Carolina, where I am, ranks number 2 in the U.S. for farmland loss. And so we see this problem just accumulating and accumulating. Our story is about the fight to preserve and sustain family farms in the Southern Appalachians. And it's not unique. And I think a lot of you are living and experiencing that same story or your own version of it for most family farms across Appalachia here and most family farms across America. So now that I've brought a lot of depression and a lot of despair and a lot of harsh reality to the conversation, we got to encounter the question of is there hope? What do we do? Or should we all just sell and go home and continue to eat, a bunch of petrochemicals because just farming doesn't work anymore? And so I think the question that we need to ask is, yes, there is hope. What do we need to do differently? What do we need to change? What I want to suggest to you today, and we'll go through these points, is that we need a different mindset. And farmers, and I don't think the despair needs to be taken personally, because the reality is that farmers do so many things well. The resilience that farming demands is pretty unique across just about any industry. The harsh reality is it's just a really tough business. And to deal with this, we've got to confront the harsh realities, but then we've got to say, what do we need to do differently? What do we need to change? How do we approach this problem in a way to solve it? It's kind of what I bring from a business career back to this and have been wrestling with for now 10 years. Just figure out, how do we deal with some of these challenges? What I want to challenge you with is that to survive and to accomplish where we want to get to, we've got to learn to break the habits of hobby farming and the mindsets that come with it, and learn to manage the farm like a business. So I got 4 things I want to challenge you with as we go through this. First of all, and I teach a business class here at the local university, Appalachian State University. And so there's a lot of overlap between the business principles I work through here and the things that I go on campus and teach to the students and come back out here and work through. But this is one of the things that I start every class with is, let's define what we mean when we talk about a business. So think about this question for yourself. What is a business? The reality is it depends on who you ask. If you talk to a lawyer, you're going to get the answer that, well, a business is a legal entity for paying taxes, right? It's an LLC or a C Corp or an S Corp or a B Corp. There's all these different legal structures. That's how we define business in legal terms. But if you talk to the accountant, well, that's fine, but we really need to think about it as a balance sheet. It's the assets and liabilities. It's, the financial picture and the financial statements that you have. That's what defines a business, is what are we doing with the money? You talk to the salespeople or the product managers, they say, well, that's fine, but really, when you get down to it, the business is the product or the service that people will pay for. That's what the business is really about. You can always find somebody in HR that's going to say, well, no, a business is a collection of people with a shared goal. It's really about the people. It's not about the product or the balance sheet of law or whatever else. Well, what I use in our class as we talk about the practical implications of putting a business to work is a business is a value creation engine. Business is a value creation engine. If you think about that, it kind of makes sense. A business exists to create value somewhere. And what makes each of our businesses unique is we're creating a different kind of value, a different kind of way. But one thing we all have in common is that we're there to try to create value. So how does a business create value? Because to understand how to fix some of the problems that we're talking about fixing, we've got to understand how to make the business sustainable and value and survivable and vital. And so to do that, we've got to be able to continue to create value in a repeatable way. So we need to understand these things. And the answer that I'm going to suggest to you is that you solve a problem for a customer to create value in a business. So a business is a value creation engine, and to create value, we have to solve a problem for a customer. And the reason that that's important is because that's what sets a business apart from a hobby, right? And what we want to talk about today is how do we break the hobby farming mindset that's really easy to get into in farming and think about our activities on the farm as a business. Because here's the reality: is if it's a hobby, then your goals are personal, right? You take up running. What's the goal? Well, I want to get in better shape. I want to be able to finish a marathon. That's my goal. It's a personal goal. Well, if running is your business, then you better be doing more than finishing the marathon. You got to win, right? So if it's a hobby, you don't have to compete. But if it's a business, you got to be better than somebody else. You're not going to make it very far in the running business if you get beat by everybody that you compete with. And that's going to be true whether you're farming or anything else. If it's a hobby, you don't have to compete. If it's a hobby, your time has no cost, right? If you decide that as a hobby, I want to build a wooden boat in my garage and I want to use all old handmade tools like Bob Vila would do, and it's going to take me 3 years to do it, well, that's fine. It's a hobby. My time doesn't cost me anything. But if I'm in the boat building business, then I've got a problem if it takes me 3 years to build a boat because I need to figure out how to allocate that time and get paid for it. And this is something that farmers are tremendous at a lot of things. One of the things that we're worst at is accounting for our own time. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And the last thing is if it's a hobby, you don't need to see the numbers. Oftentimes you don't want to see the numbers, right? If you see the numbers, then somebody, a spouse can ask, hey, how much did we spend on chicken feed last year? Or, how much money have I spent taking up this golfing habit or this boating hobby or whatever it is that I may do? So you don't want to see the numbers sometimes if it's a hobby, but in business, we've got to look at the numbers. So if it's a business, we've got to break some of these mindsets and break some of these habits. Here are the 4 things that I want to challenge you to think about in changing the mindsets of how you're approaching your business. The first one is stop ignoring your numbers. And this is something that I'm tempted to do, and I see farmers do a lot. Hobbyists don't have to know all the costs. But you've got to know what you need to make your business work. So it starts with, how profitable do you need your business to be? Some of you are probably bivocational, and so you may be paying the mortgage and paying the rent and keeping up with the major expenses and saving for retirement by working at the hardware store, working at the university, or working with the state, or having a job that provides you with the flexibility to farm. And so it works fine for you to make $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 in farming. Some of you are trying to make a living off of this. Well, if you don't know how much you need and you don't factor that into your numbers, then you're going to continue to struggle and not know how to operate. So here on the farm, we deal with this. We have about 115 acres. We've got to know those numbers really well to know how many animals can we produce in 115 acres. And if I can only get, say, 30 or 40 animals through our pastures in a year on our 115 acres, because some of it's hilly and some of it's wooded and so forth, and if I can only make $500 a head, well, then I only may be able to make $20,000, $15,000 in gross margin before I pay for insurance and utilities and expenses and all those things. That tells me that this isn't going to work without doing something different. And so to be able to grow, to be able to scale, I need to be able to find other pasture to raise cattle on, or I need to partner with other farms who can supply, or I need to raise my margins, or I need to do something different than what I'm doing. But if I don't know those numbers, I can't make those decisions. I worked with a manufacturing company at one point in my career, and we had a plant that was struggling with our customer satisfaction. Our customers were complaining that our products were always late. We were never on time. And so I was part of the team that went in and we started to look around and pulled up our on-time delivery record, and it said that we were delivering on time at about 95%. And yet our customers were constantly complaining that we were always late. Well, as we dug deeper, what we found out is that we were measuring from our perspective, not theirs. So we were measuring by line item and they were measuring by order. So if you ordered 100 things from me and I shipped 90 of them, I would give myself a 90% score. But you needed 100 and you would give me a 0. And so we changed one thing. We changed the way that we measured from by the line item to by the order. Did we get the order perfect for the customer and delivered on time, or did we not? And when we started measuring that, we found that we were right out of the gate, not at 95%, but at below 30%. And just by measuring it, without changing anything in our operation, Just by measuring it and letting people know that we measured it, within a month, we were over 50%. Then we started to dig into what are the other things that we can change and improve to fix a lot of the problems that were causing these delays. But until we knew the numbers, we couldn't do anything to manage the business better. As hobbyists, as hobby farmers, we tend to think of it as, well, we know what we do, we farm, we're just going to go out and farm. The numbers are for the accountants, and we don't really need them. And the reality is, you have to be able to manage and measure your business. Your financials are not just for filing your taxes. If you're going to run your business as a business, you've got to know your numbers. And what I would challenge you to do is define the 2 or 3 key metrics. What are the things that you want to measure that define whether on a weekly or a daily business your business is working? And it's going to be different for everyone, but it's what does our production need to be? We have a division that is processing. We have USDA inspected meat processing within our butchery division. And so we measure what's our revenue dollars per labor hour, because I know if that's not above a certain point, then we're not going to be able to be profitable. And so I want to look at that on a regular basis, not at the end of the year when I do my taxes. And so define those 2 or 3 key metrics that define for you, what do you do well and is the business working or not? Track those things and keep a look at them. But you got to know your numbers. If you don't know your numbers, you can't manage your business. All right. So there's one. Next is you need to stop saying yes. What does that mean? Well, if it's a hobby, you can operate on pure enjoyment with no strategy, right? You can do whatever you want to do just because it's what you want to do. If you want to plant a garden and plant tomatoes and cucumbers, you're welcome to do that. And you don't have to have a strategy for doing that. Let me ask you this. How many different businesses do you have? Here's the mistake that we made early on. Is we said, all right, well, so we're raising cattle and we're selling beef retail in our store and it's working okay, but we're not making enough revenue and we need to do more. So what if we also sold to some restaurants? We started selling to restaurants. Well, that's helping a little bit, but that's not really getting everything that we need either. But what if we start doing some tours on the farm and we bring people in and do, it's a beautiful place. As you can see the farm, it attracts people. So if we did tours, that can make us a little bit extra revenue. So we started doing tours. Well, what if we did events too? What if we hosted some events? So we ended up having a big food festival on the farm, invited chefs that we work with from across the state, 12 of the top chefs in North Carolina, sold tickets, had music, had all of this stuff going on. It was a fantastic event. But here's what happened was that event took a ton of time and energy away from our core business that we weren't able to invest. And so while the event was a success and we made some money at it, the 3 months before the event was punishing for the business because we didn't spend the time on the core business that we needed to. The tendency, I think, especially in farming, is to, this isn't quite working. This is a really hard business. I'm struggling to make this work. But what if I plant some pumpkins? And so this fall, I can bring people to the farm with pumpkins. And what if we do some events? And maybe we can host weddings. And you know what? We probably should have some chickens out there. And while we're at it, it'd be cool to get some pigs. And, you know, you can always process and sell a little bit of pigs. And we could put some lambs up on the hill if we put some fence up there. And what you find yourself doing, what you think you're doing, is you're adding revenue streams that help the business. And every time you add a revenue stream, you think this is going to help us make a little bit more money and make the numbers work. Here's what you're really doing. What you're really doing is you're taking a business that's not quite working and you're starting a second business that's not working. And then a third business that's not working. And before you know it, you're running 5 businesses that aren't working. They're not working because you've spread yourself too thin and you're trying to do too much and you're not focused on your core business and you don't have a strategy. And so, what is a strategy? Something else that we teach in the business class, and define a strategy as a set of decisions on how to use limited resources to accomplish your purpose. So the first thing you got to know is, what is your purpose? Once you know what you're trying to accomplish, you can build a strategy around that and you can determine, what do we need to be focusing our time and energy on? Here's the reality, is if growing pumpkins is more profitable than what you're doing right now, then you shouldn't just grow pumpkins on the side. You should grow pumpkins. Stop doing what you're doing and go grow pumpkins, because you can make more money at that. That may be a more viable business than the business you're doing. If you're better at it, you like it better, you can do it more. But if it's not, then take that energy and put it back into your core business. But if we don't have a strategy, we don't have a framework for what we're trying to do, we don't know what the purpose is, we don't recognize the limited resources that we have, and we allocate those, then we're not going to be able to operate and manage the business to be successful. Great book, and I'll recommend this at the end. But Roger Martin, co-author of this book, one of the quotes is, strategy is about choosing to do some things and not other things. Here's what we found out in our story that I told you is, so the events, as I said, that event was punishing. It was successful from the event standpoint, but it was punishing for the business because it wasn't aligned with our core mission. Contrasted with tours. We actually had over Christmas, you can book a tour online on our farm without ever having to call or do anything. It's automated. And we have an application software that allows us to do that. We had somebody book a tour during Christmas week, and we didn't notice that they had booked a tour until an hour before the tour. But we did notice it, thankfully, just before they got here. And so the family showed up. My dad was there. He does most of the tours. So dad took them on a tour. 45 minutes later, they finished the tour. They came in the farm store. They purchased $300 worth of meat, and they left and went home. And as they left, we turned off the lights, closed the door, and we left with them. There was no cleanup. There was no trash to throw away. We didn't have to collect anything. We didn't have to take off tablecloths and wash dishes and put up chairs and tables and take them back to where we'd gotten them from, because we were set up for tours. And tours are set up to be complementary to our core business, which is selling our branded, healthy local meats. And so I'm not saying that you can't do anything except one single thing. What I am saying is you need to define what your core business is and make sure that all of your energies are directed towards advancing that core business. So the tours for us are complementary to the tour business, and we keep doing them because they bring people to the farm and they help us sell our product. The events were competitive to our core business because they distracted and sucked energy away from what we needed to be doing. And so that's something that once we kind of acknowledged and understood the strategy, we were able to say no to. And so if you know your strategy, you can start saying no. And saying no more is one of the most important things that farmers can learn to do. I think it's true for everybody, but especially for those on the farm. Our tendency is to say yes because there's always a way to do it, and you just go figure it out. But start saying no and start focusing your energies on where you can create the most value. All right, next, I want you to stop selling to everybody. I'm a weird business professor that tells people to stop selling, but here's why. So the hobbyist, you're a hobbyist and you're carving and you're making things from wood and you go to some exhibit, you can talk to everybody who walks by. You can spend half your day talking to anybody who's interested in the hobby that you're interested in. And it doesn't matter, right? Because your time doesn't cost anything. And those are interesting conversations, and that's what you enjoy. But if you're running a business, you can't do that. You have to know who your target customer is, and you have to know them well. And you have to build your business and your strategy around serving that customer, because remember, a business is a value creation engine. And we only create value if we're solving problems for our customer. So before we can solve a problem for our customer, we have to know the customer. We also have to know the problem, but we have to know the customer. So you need to understand who has the problem that you solve, and you focus on that customer group. You're way better off focusing on a customer that already has the problem that you solve than in trying to convince a new customer to have a problem that you can solve. For example, I don't spend a lot of time trying to sell to vegetarians. It is tremendously true for most vegetarians, and there may be some on the call here, and I mean no offense, but I believe that our product is nutritious and beneficial and healthy, and we're designed to eat high quality, nutritious beef that's produced on a farm like ours. So it's beneficial, but that's not a beneficial argument for me to have for somebody who's already committed to believing that my product doesn't solve a problem that they have, that they don't have that problem. I'm way better off finding people who wants to buy a steak, but right now is buying it from Omaha Steaks or is buying it from Whole Foods, and convince them that my product solves their problem better than I am trying to argue someone into believing that they have a problem in the first place. So focus on the people that understand and that value the problem that you can solve. Another customer, another activity we had a factory at that same company making gaskets down in Mexico, and our growth got kind of stagnant. And we were tempted actually to look at lowering our prices because we weren't really feeling like we were making penetration in the market. Before we did that, fortunately, we went and talked to our customers. And we found out that particularly for those that had large maintenance operations, the problem wasn't price, the problem was availability. When you've got a major piece of equipment and it goes down, whether you're spending $100 or $200 or $50 on a gasket is pretty immaterial if you're losing tens of thousands of dollars a day or an hour when your production facility is down. They cared a whole lot more about availability than they did about price. Once we understood that that was what was important to them, that was the problem that we needed to solve. All we had to do was figure out what products to stock on the shelves, and we could go grow our sales and increase our price, not decrease it, to gain more margin. Same thing applies to you, is you can't go chase every customer. You have to find the customers that work for you and then really focus on serving that well. So some of you may be spending Saturdays and Thursdays at the farmer's market and then trying to sell to restaurants and then trying to run a farm store and then trying to find other ways that you can sell other products that you can find and start all these extra businesses, and you're running yourself ragged, right? You're exhausted and you're working harder and harder and harder, and it's getting harder and harder and harder to make a little margin and make the numbers work. And it's because we're trying to do too much and we're not focused on where are we really creating value? What is the value that we create? Who are the customers that value what we can offer? And how do I serve them really well? And then to the point of the story that I told, ask questions. We're tempted to go talk about the value of our product, talk about why our farm is special, talk about why our meat is more nutritious, and talk and talk and talk. But if we'll stop and listen, if we'll ask our customers what's important to them, then they'll tell us, I don't care what your price is, I need to know if you have it on the shelf. I don't care how much your meat costs, I just want to make sure that it meets the requirement that I have. I want to make sure that you're not using antibiotics. Well, you want to be able to sell to those points and understand what's important to them. So ask questions, and people are happy to talk to you. Whoever asks the most questions wins in a lot of environments, but especially when you're selling and developing customer relationships. If you know your customer and you know your customer well, you can understand their problem well, you can solve more problems, you can create more value. This is how you get your business to start working, start gaining some momentum, and start getting some traction, and start seeing that growth that you need to have. All right, one more. I want you to stop competing on price. So hobbyists, if you're a hobbyist, you can undersell the market, right? Because again, your time has no cost. And so you can make a wood carving and sell it at the farmer's market or the state fair for $3 if you want to, because it's just fun and interesting to you. But if you're in a business, you can't compete on price unless you have a cost advantage. So I want to ask you, how many of you compete on price? And I imagine that some of you are thinking, thank goodness, this one doesn't apply to me. I can move on. Because I'm not trying to undercut Costco and Walmart and the local grocery store on price. I know that my product is more valuable. I know that I can sell it for more. I'm not competing on price. I'm competing on value, right? Are you sure? How many of you refuse to pay a contractor to fix a fence or to make a delivery or to repair a leak? All right. So how many of you are exceptional plumbers? Back to the point earlier, if you're a fantastic plumber, then go plumb. More likely, the local plumber in your community is a better plumber than you are. So you're not competing when you decide that you're going to do the plumbing instead of hire that person to do it. You're not competing on your advantage, are you? What are you competing on? You're competing on price. You're willing to do it for cheaper than he was. Now, plumbers are expensive, so I kind of get that sentiment. And I'm a farmer too, so I definitely get the sentiment that I don't want to pay a contract. But we over-apply this, don't we? We decide, well, why am I going to pay some guy to come on to the farm with a post driver and a fancy, expensive piece of equipment? I've got a set of post hole diggers and a shovel. What are you doing? You're competing with that vendor. And what are you competing on? You're competing on price. What you're saying is, I'm willing to do it for $3 an hour, $6 an hour, $7 an hour. Whatever you may be getting it for, you don't have a competitive advantage, and don't compete on where you don't have a competitive advantage. It's the same thing as trying to take your product out and selling it for 10% less than what Walmart's selling it for when we do these things. But as farmers, this is what we do all the time. We determine, I'm not going to pay a contractor. I don't have enough money. I'm not going to pay a contractor. I can do it myself. I'm a farmer. My granddad taught me how to dig a post hole and how to fix electrical wiring and how to do plumbing. I know how to do all these things. I'm not going to pay a contractor. And when you do this, this is what's wearing us out. We're running ourselves ragged. We're taking on too much and we're trying to do everything. And when you're doing everything, you can't invest your time where you create the most value. So and you got to realize that your time has an awful lot of value. I've tempted to make this mistake and hey, why am I going to pay somebody $50 for delivery when I can go pick it up? So now I've saved myself $50, but it's an hour and a half trip over there and an hour and a half trip back. So now I've worked for 3 hours to make that $50, but it also took a $30 tank of gas. So now I've worked for 3 hours to make $20. So now what have I done? I've competed with that delivery driver on price and I've offered $7 an hour to do it. My business isn't going to get very far if I'm working for $7 an hour. So this is, I think, and probably of the four that we're talking about, the one that farmers make the mistake the most. And I really want to challenge you to know where you create value and what your competitive advantage is, and go do that. And find ways to get other people to do the things that you don't do as well. Jim Collins, there's a great business book that I recommend called Good to Great. Jim Collins did a survey of the most successful, sustained businesses that for decades outperformed the market. And he found all these common threads. And one of the ones, he calls it the hedgehog concept. Those companies that find the intersection of what you're passionate about, what you can be the best in the world at, and what you can get paid to do. So where do you create value? Where do you have a competitive advantage? And what do you love doing? You find that, that's where you create value. That's where your business has a value creation engine. You spend all your time doing that. So if you're a plumber, spend all your time plumbing. But if you're a farmer and you create really exceptional quality products off of your farm, then spend all your time doing that and find somebody else to do the deliveries and fix the wiring and come do the plumbing and build the fencing, because they've got the right equipment for it, they've got the right tools for it, and they can do it better than you can. If you know where you create your value, you can stay focused on what's profitable. So this is the framework that I want to offer you as you build your business by creating more value. Understand the business as a value creation engine. So I want you to stop ignoring the numbers. Stop saying yes. Stop trying to sell to everybody and stop competing on price. And instead, you're going to start measuring your performance. You're going to start focusing on your strategy and letting that tell you where you can say no. You're going to start knowing your customers extremely well and knowing their problems extremely well. And you're going to start focusing your limited resources, especially your time, on the thing that creates your highest value. Last thing, just some of these resources that I draw on. These are great reads depending on what you're focused on. And these slides will be, I believe, Sam, they'll be shared afterwards. But in strategy book, I referenced Roger Martin, a book called Playing to Win, lays out the cascade of choices model for thinking about your strategy. That's a great tool and a great read. Start with why on building a purpose-driven business and understand what really motivates and drives you. Another great resource. Sales, there's a few great resources for sales and negotiations that I strongly recommend. Traction is a great model, the entrepreneurial operating system. If you're struggling with the operations and the day-to-day and getting things to work smoothly, and how do you manage a business like a business, the data, the execution, the model that Gino Wickman offers is great. And then I mentioned the book from Jim Collins on Good to Great on just value creation and how you think about an exceptional business. Those are great resources to draw on. And so I presume that that solved every problem that you all have across all of your different businesses across the country. But in the event that we haven't solved everything, I did save a little bit of time for questions. And so happy to dig into what you guys are dealing with and anything else that we want to talk about.
That was great, great. Thank you so much. So there's been quite a few questions in the chat about the recording. So the recording will be sent to you in a follow-up email tomorrow. Gray's slide deck is quite large, and so I have to figure out a way to share that a little bit better.
Yeah, Sam, I think I can compress those images and resend that to you in a smaller format.
Okay, that would be
I will do that
great.
for you and make that easier for people to access.
That would be perfect. Thank you, Gray. All right, so we are going to go ahead and run a quick poll to see This really helps us with our funding, and I know I say that every single time, but it really does. And Catherine, you can go ahead and unshare your screen so that okay, so we can see Gray properly here. Um, yeah, so Catherine, you want to ask the first question?
Sure. Wendy asks, how can I determine how much the business needs to make? Is it dependent on my personal budget or my business model? Not sure how to set that profit margin.
Okay, so yeah, how much does a business need to make? So uh, it sounds like first I'm going to presume that the business and you are the same thing from the standpoint of profitability. So one of those questions, are there multiple owners? Is there a single owner? Is the single owner completely dependent on the business or partly dependent on the business? So that's where you got to start and it really is, what does your personal situation look like to determine what do you need to make out of it and what can you afford? But then once you have that and you understand, okay, I can live on getting just a little bit extra. I'd like to get $10,000 a year out of my farming operation because I'm paying the bills elsewhere. Then that's your number. What's it worth to you to do this and give up your time to go make that $10,000 instead of, do something else with your time or pursue some other interest or some other side business or a hobby. You may want to pursue a hobby. Hobbies aren't bad. I'm not down on hobbies. But if you need to live off this, then understand what is that number, and not just how do I squeak by, how do I tread water, but understand how much do I need to be putting away for retirement, because you're not going to be able to do this when you're 90, or maybe you will. My granddad apparently was able to, but not everybody can. So, yeah, understand what you need and then just bake that into the numbers as that's the profitability that needs to fall out after I calculate all the other costs. So the biggest key there that we all struggle with is know all of your costs, not just what did the product cost, what did I pay in feed, what did I pay in seed, what did I spend in fuel, but also, what is transportation and what is shipping and what are all of the things that are going into this, and make sure you account for all of them.
I got some really great advice at one point from a friend of mine. He works for NC Choices in North Carolina, and his name is Lee. And Lee said that something that I had never really thought of is you should always be saving or putting money aside for the next vehicle or the next tractor or the next piece of equipment, because what you've got is going to break down, and you don't want to be in a position where you can't replace it.
Right.
And I hadn't thought about that. So I thought that was really good advice. All right. Allison asks, in the 14 years I've been in business, I'm always hearing to solve the problem of the customer. I make cheese and I've never been able to conceive of what that problem is that needs to be solved. Allison, I think the problem is people need cheese and you have it. And
Well,
that's a big problem if they don't have it. So,
absolutely. And I don't mean problem in the negative sense that we often sometimes it can be negative, but oftentimes, especially in our environment and farming, it can be a positive problem or an experience or a benefit to a customer, not necessarily a problem and a negative thing. So I would agree that the problem is that it could be any number of them. It could be that your target customer is there's the local family who's particularly concerned about the quality of their food. This is who we market to, is the people that really care not only what's in their food, but what's not in their food. And they're concerned about the additives, the preservatives, the ingredients that are in the commercially produced industrial cheese that they find in the grocery store. And they're looking for something that's really high quality, defined as clean and healthy, that they want to feed their family. Well, that is their problem. Their problem is they need a good quality cheese that's clean and healthy and local and that they can really trust. And it doesn't have to be a problem that they're not solving. They may be getting cheese from mail order from Wisconsin that they found someplace that they really like, and it is clean and it doesn't have a bunch of preservatives, but you solve that same problem. And what are the ways in which you can solve it better? You're closer than whoever they're getting it from now. You have better quality than whoever they're getting it from now. you're more accessible, or you're willing to deliver, or you're willing to ship it to them, or you're right there at the farmer's market. But figure out, what is that group of people? What do they really care about? And how do you solve the problem maybe in a better way that they're currently solving it? One other thing to add is your competition may be the people that are doing the same thing that you're doing, but they could also be the people that are solving the same problem that you're solving. What I mean by that is we offer farm tours. So in the farm tour category, well, our competition can be the farm down the road that also offers farm tours. They do the same thing that we do. But our competition could also be the Mass General store over in town because it's a local attraction, or Grandfather Mountain that's a local attraction. Because the problem that we're solving is not the need for a farm tour. The problem that we're solving is the family that comes here to visit and needs something to do that's family friendly on a sunny afternoon on a Saturday. Well, that could be come to the farm, but it could be go on a hike. And so my competition in that standpoint, in that sense, is I'm solving the problem, not necessarily doing the same thing that I do, but solving the same problem that I solve. And so you can find customers in unlikely places because the customers that are going and doing other things can come to a farm tour. You may find the same thing with cheese. It doesn't necessarily mean people that are making cheese. It could be people that are making charcuterie boards and they're just looking for local, or it could be a gift product. I don't care whether it's cheese or something else that's locally produced. Yours is a great alternative for that. And so find a way to market to that need.
Our next question is about some common business advice that this person has been given. I'm going to try to condense this question. But basically, they've been told over and over that if you align your business with your core values and you're clear on what those values are and why you do what you do, even if that's not the most profitable or cheapest thing to do, then your customers will be those people who share similar values. What do you think of values-based business and marketing and using that as a strategy for profitability?
In general, I think I agree that the book that I mentioned from Simon Sinek talks about that principle of starting with why. It says a lot of businesses, a quick summary is a lot of businesses, a lot of companies know what they do and they can talk about that very well, but they're not able to really talk about why, what's their underlying purpose. And that, just the way that our brain works, we got a logical side of the brain that drives our verbal processing and logic, but we've got the emotional side of our brain that drives decisions. And when you can connect with that side of the brain, which is really hard to do verbally, then you can get that visceral reaction. I mean, you've had the feeling probably yourself that says, I made this decision. I can't tell you why. I just knew it was right. That's the other side of your brain. That's the emotional part. Tapping into that is a big deal and is pretty powerful. If you can do that for your customers and make that connection, then they're not coming to you just because of the price that you offer or the convenience. They're coming to you because a part of their identity connects with what you're doing. That can be very powerful. Just the caution is when you say, I'm willing to do something that's less margin, I'm willing to do something that may not be as profitable as another thing. Well, that can be a very principled approach. You just got to watch and make sure that we're not compromising the profit all the way down to being in the negative, and making sure that you're not giving away so much that the business doesn't work. Your principles are intact, but your business may not be viable. So now you're at the point of, well, the business isn't viable. So we've got to make some hard decisions then if you're at that point. But I absolutely agree that operating on principle is wonderful. And think about the opposite. If you don't operate on principle, you just chase the highest profit that you can find. And that's already not going to be true of almost any farmer that you're going to talk to, but it's not a great way to operate or go through life. I think that is good advice.
Okay. Cheryl says that she is guilty. She's doing 5 different activities on her sheep farm by work week, agritourism farm on the weekend. So she tracks 5 activities separately by income and expenses and has been doing this for 4 years. And 2 of the 5 business activities are showing profit. The other 3 are potentially showing profit in the next year or so. What is a reasonable amount of time to make some of those / decisions?
I don't think there's an answer to that that's a numerical answer. I think the answer is more about what makes sense for you personally. Um, and I would maybe start at the end and work backwards. And this is a great way to process a lot of things. But what does success look like? So you've started the second and then the third and then the fourth and then the fifth business or business unit or division of what you're doing. Well, look 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. And if all of those are successful, what does that look like? Are you less exhausted or more exhausted? Are you less profitable or more profitable? And what's the trade-off? And then what is the likelihood that you're going to be successful at all 5 things? So I would encourage you to be willing to make hard choices. One of the things that I tell my students often is that I want you to learn to care way more about what is true than what you would prefer to be true. So we all start a business preferring that it's going to be true, that we're going to be overrun by customers. But we need to find out if that is true or not. And so, for those things that aren't working yet, I would not say that means you have to kill them. That means you have to stop doing them. But maybe a helpful way to think about it is, if you pick the one that seems, least likely to succeed or the biggest struggle, and you just didn't have to do that anymore, would you feel a sense of relief or disappointment? That may tell you a little bit of something. But then as you think about, all right, is this true or would I just prefer for this to be true? Really dig in and ask the hard questions of, what's it take to make this tourism thing work? And are customers really valuing this, or do I just want them to be really valuing this? Do I have something that's attractive for people to come and visit? Or do I just wish that people had the same nostalgia for my farm that I do? And maybe there is value there, but you really just got to clean things up a little bit because it needs to look a little bit more welcoming. Or maybe it's, time to make some hard decisions. That's something you've got to dig through.
Can you share how to identify the best customer when the customer might not be local? What questions do I ask myself to create the customer avatar? Was that a typo?
Yeah, customer avatar. That's kind of
okay.
cartoon image of the target customer is what they mean. How do you think about if the customer is not local? I would say, one, let's go back to this is where I always go back to. Let's go back to the definition of our business is, if we're a value creation engine, then what is the value that we're creating for that customer and how do we create value? And why is it unique to them if they're not nearby? And it may be that just if you're in a really small market, you're in a remote place, where we are, we're in Boone, population's about 20,000. There's another 20,000 students, and students don't buy premium beef. So Charlotte is 2 million people market that's 2 hours away. So, we focus on that market some because it's a larger market, but it carries with it some costs. So one of the things that you really need to understand is how am I operationally set up to serve that customer? So first I need to understand their problem, right? And what's their criteria for evaluating the solution to the problem? I really want something that's readily available because I'm looking to buy product this afternoon and eat it for dinner tonight. Or I'm not as concerned about that. I really want to make a local connection. So understand, as you build that avatar, what's really important to that customer. Make sure that the market is big enough. There's enough of those customers in Charlotte or wherever you're trying to go. And then understand what's my advantage? Where do I have a leg up in solving that problem? Make sure there's a good overlap in the advantage that you have with the problem that they're wanting to solve. And so you're not kind of fighting upstream. But yeah, thinking about it in terms of, almost maybe sometimes a Venn diagram, like how much value can I create for this customer versus this customer over here? How much value can I create for the local customer versus the customer that may be remote, but really, really, really is passionate about, keto and carnivore diet, and they really want to buy a product like mine, and I can really meet that need. Think about it from a value creation standpoint. And there's nothing wrong with targeting multiple customers, there is something wrong, I think, with targeting all the customers. And so for us, the fitness market, people that are really concerned about the health and the quality of their food, quality defined as nutrient density, that's a good market. And the families, people that are concerned about quality of their food, quality defined as cleanliness and clean label, it's a very different customer, but our product performs well in both. We can serve both of those customers. The gift market, people that are concerned not so much about those two definitions of quality, but I want the best tasting steak that I can find. Well, we compete well there too. So I can serve all three of those customers with the same product, doing things the same way. But I'm not also going to spend a whole lot of energy trying to win over students and just anybody that may walk by. I'm going to focus on those where I have a competitive advantage because of the value that I can create.
All right, thank you for that. Mosette asks, where can I find out the industry standard percentages for my farm? For example, what percentages of gross profit is in the industry standard for farm labor, seed, etc.? I assume that means so what do people usually, so I guess for raising pigs, how much time would you
Right,
put
how do you
into
break
labor?
down your cost? Two resources that I can think of, the farm census is something that the USDA does every 5 or 10 years. That's on their website. The data that I showed earlier about, how many farms are losing money and what's the average income, that comes from that census survey. And so that can be somewhat helpful. It's a little bit more of a macro level. Depending on what state you're in North Carolina, we have a fantastic cooperative extension office, but every state has one connected with your agricultural school. Get in touch. If you haven't, get in touch with your local extension agent. Every county should have an extension agent or multiple agents that's kind of tailored and focused towards what's going on in your particular region. And so I would reach out to extension and ask for help with those particular resources. Two great places to start. And if you strike out there, go to your local ag school. The land grant college should have an agricultural university, and they're going to have some data or some links to where to find that.
Do you have an e-commerce platform that you recommend to sell your products in? Why?
We started out on Square because it was free. And Square's, pretty effective and pretty simple and easy to set up. We then moved to Shopify because it added some functionality and some tools that we valued. And Shopify can offer a lot of integrations and things that can help you automate, and is a pretty well-developed platform that you can customize a lot of times with plugins from other. So you can plug into QuickBooks, your accounting system. You can plug into various places. The reason that we moved off of Shopify is because as we sell meat by the pound, not by the package. And so being able to sell in partial quantity is a challenge that's a little bit unique to us. There are some platforms that are built specifically for farmers markets, for selling produce, for selling things by the pound, if that's an issue that you need to solve. If you're selling by the unit, either I've got a CSA package and every one is $100, then Shopify or Square can work great. If you're trying to sell meat or you need to sell your very variable size produce by the pound, and that's a big enough issue that you can't find some workarounds, we went to a tool called GrazeCart, Graze. It's not one that I developed. And so it has the functionality to be able to sell. So for example, I would offer you a steak that is 14 to 16 ounces. You would put in your credit card to pay for approximately $30. Then when I pull the actual steak and it turns out to be 14.3 ounces, then I charge you $27.93 or whatever the case may be. And it communicates to the customer that, hey, expect that your total is going to go up or down based on what you actually get, kind of like buying at the butcher shop counter. So that's one that we've gone through. It doesn't have some of the functionality that Shopify has, but that was important for us to be able to sell by the pound because of the market that we're serving.
Levon, if you wouldn't mind just clarifying what you mean by your niche markets, and then if you wouldn't mind doing that, then I'm going to move on to Sherry's question. Can you talk a little bit about value-added products? I deal mainly in primary products, but no one wants to pay for those. They want to pay for luxury items, and I can't figure it out to have enough time in the day to add those in. I'm with you, Sherry. It's all time consuming. I do make my own sausages, and it is time consuming.
Yeah, I keep trying to run out of things to do, and I haven't been successful at that. So one is I would go back to, the principle of, if you're great at smoking meats or at, making chimichurri, then go do that and let somebody else farm it. But if you're not, then go find a co-packer. And that can be, if you've not done it, that is challenging to do. If you're in the meat side, start with your local slaughterhouse. You can search. There are some in most communities. They may be a few hours away. Ours is a couple hours away from here. We don't have smoking ourselves. But find that shop that's able to do that. Again, Extension may be a resource to ask that question. In North Carolina, the Department of Ag is great about making connections. And so, maybe call your Department of Agriculture and say, hey, do you have a list of co-packers that produce sauces or jams and jellies? Or do you have, most states, I think, have a list of certainly if you're producing meat and most food products, you've got to be registered with the state or with the USDA. And so do you have a list of all of the registered inspected meat producers that are USDA or state inspected? Do you have a list of everyone who is, canning food and doing this commercially? Other than an internet search, that can be a place to find who's doing this. Also, just walk into the local specialty stores and find, what's on the shelf. Every package, see if I have one here. Here's one. So this is Mighty Muscadine, somebody locally that raises muscadine juice and makes juices and waters. And so this is their muscadine supplements. And here on the back, it tells you who manufactured it and where they're located and what their phone number is. That has to be on every package. So you go find a sample product that is similar to what you're wanting to make, and see who nearby is making it. If you go to your local farmer's market or your local store, that's a specialty store, you may find some of those products that kind of match up with what you're wanting to do. And find that. But co-packers, it's a pretty proven, established business. And if you have the supply, often they can help you with the recipes and the labeling and the branding, the logos and all of that to roll that out.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that. I would also, not that anybody wants my 2 cents, but a lot of what determines what a luxury product is the person who's marketing it. And I would argue that pasture raised, locally grown, that is a very luxurious product. It just depends on who.
That's a great point that I shouldn't have skipped over. Thanks for catching me on that, because that's true. Yeah, if you're farming a product locally, then if nothing else, somebody knows that it didn't come from Australia or Brazil. It didn't come from a manufacturing plant in China. You know where it came from. Just that is of huge value. One of the things we're able to say, and I can tell customers, that I can show you for any package of meat, I know what animal it came from. I know who that animal's mother was, who his father was. I know how it was treated, where it lived every day of its life. None of that information is actually useful to the customer. No customer has ever decided what package of ground beef to get based on who the mother of the animal it came from. Just the fact that I know it, though, conveys value and something special about the product that that people are interested in. I see somebody say that might creep folks out, and that's true too. We got to be careful of in our marketing. We try not to give the close-up staring into the animal's soul. You want to see them grazing peacefully in the pasture away from you. So fair point. But yes, just the fact that you can know what's in it and what's not in it is itself a high value product. But doing the extra thing and then go make a sausage out of that or go make something special can add value. And there's people out there that can help with that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are at 4 o'clock, so we're going to have to end our time with you, Gray. Thank you so much. Catherine, if you could share our final slide, that would be great. So everyone can see, this was our very last webinar for this until this, not for the whole year, but for a webinar season. And we will be starting back up again in September. So you're not going to be receiving emails from me weekly like you have been. It's going to be more like monthly, but I will try to share things as they come along. So a huge thank you, as always, to everybody who attended and all the wonderful questions. And Gray, just such a wealth of knowledge. And it was really fantastic being able to talk to you and hear your insights. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you both. I enjoyed it.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And so I will be sending out an email tomorrow with a link to the recording and any information that was shared during the presentation. I've been taking notes, and I'm sure Catherine has as well. And I hope you guys have an absolutely fantastic growing season this year, and that you'll join us back again in September. Seems like we're already planning. We've got tons of stuff already up, starting, and it's going to be what next season's going to be just as wonderful as this season. So thank you, everybody. Bye, Gray. Bye,
Bye.
Catherine.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.